Next is Sandboxy or Sandbox IE, which is an excellent sandbox that I recommend for Windows. It is shareware software. The free version is missing a few features which are available in the paid version, and after 30 days of use the free version displays reminders to upgrade you to the paid version but remains functional. The missing functionality is to automatically run programs under Sandboxy even when they are not started directly through Sandboxy. This could be quite a useful function and maybe you might need it. Programs can be forced by name or by containing folder. Another missing feature is running programs in more than one sandbox at the same time, which again could be useful. Prices are here. Sandboxy is very simple to use out of the box, but if you want to get the most out of it, you will need to spend a little time configuring it and working out what features they offer so you can configure it to use it in the way that you need. Just download it as normal and install it. It's your usual simple Windows install. Or you can use Choco to install it. Let's do a search here for Sandboxy. So we can see there's two versions, one that actually installs. It's installing. Downloading. And there we go, installed. And there it is. And that's what it looks like. And immediately it's popping up asking me if I want to apply the configuration settings which will improve compatibility with these applications. So you can see here it's the Windows and Office licensing service. So you'd have to look into that as to whether or not that was something you wanted to do or not. But yes, it's okay. I'll give you some tips on Sandboxy. If you see in the bottom right here, the sandbox icon is there. You can right click on here. And if you go up here, this will show you here the sandboxes that you have. At the moment, there's just the default sandbox, which comes when you install it. If you go up here, you can run each of these within a sandbox. Your default web browser, email reader, you can launch any program through the sandbox or through the start menu or through Windows Explorer. The way I tend to run things is just by right-clicking and then run sandboxed. And then it will give you a choice of which sandbox you want to use. You have different settings per sandbox. So I can choose here the default sandbox or to run outside the sandbox. But obviously I want to run it as the default sandbox and I don't want to run it as administrator. So there Firefox has started within the default sandbox, and you can tell that it's in the sandbox because you can see this yellow box around it. So now that is protected by the default sandbox, and you can see this icon has changed. It's got some red dots on it because the sandbox is in use. If I right click on here again, go to show window. This here is the sandbox, and you can see what's running within the sandbox. And there obviously you can see that Firefox is there and the accompanying processes that Sandbox itself requires. Now I can configure this default sandbox or sandboxes that I want to use. If I go here, sandbox settings. Make sure these two are ticked so that you can see a border around the windows, because what you can do is accidentally think you're running something sandboxed and you're not. So it's always useful to have a yellow border around it. Let's go to recovery. When you close your sandbox, or the browser in this case, it will delete content or ask you if you want to delete content that you may have downloaded in this folder here. But what's set up automatically is what's called immediate recovery. Now let me show you what immediate recovery is, and it is quite useful. So let's go here. So I'm choosing to download a file here just to demonstrate. I'm choosing the file sdelete because we are going to use that later. So let's download that, save it, and then this is what comes up. This is because we've got immediate recovery set. So instead of storing this within the sandbox straight away, what it does is it says, do you want to store it in the sandbox, or do we want to immediately recover it out of the sandbox and put it within the real file system? So we can recover it here if we want. We can recover and explore. We can recover and run. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to close it here, and this means it will be saved to the sandbox and not the real file system. So if I view files and folders, we can see there it is, downloaded sdelete.zip in the downloads folder. Now if we look in the downloads folder, it isn't there. Actually it is there. This is a version I downloaded previously, but the version I've just downloaded isn't there, because that is a zip file. So the SD zip file isn't here. It isn't in the downloads folder. Now if I was to run Explorer sandboxed with the default sandbox, the Explorer would be able to see what is in the sandbox. So if I go on downloads here, there we can see the SD delete that is within the default sandbox. And you can see here this is yellow. Close that. We look back here and you can see it isn't there when you're not sandboxed. So let's go back to our options. Default sandbox settings. So those are recovery options. This is set for the immediate recovery, but you don't necessarily have to have that set. You can choose at the end what you want to do with the files that have gone into the sandbox. Now delete. It's usually a good idea to automatically delete the contents of your sandbox when the sandbox is closed or the application that you've launched with the sandbox is closed. So I usually have this set. And then you've got the choice of delete command, so you can securely delete or wipe with random data or zeros and ones over the content that's in the sandbox, and that's a good idea. So you want to use sdelete or eraser if you like. So let me show you how you would do that. So select sdelete, and we know where we've put that. This is what I downloaded before. And there what you can see is it creates a special command so that when it deletes securely, or rather it deletes multiple times. See, this is 3 passes. You can get both eraser and sdelete with Choco if you want to. As an example. So that's installed. And that will install Eraser. So back to Sandboxy. You can force processes or applications to run from a specific folder. That can be quite useful with things like auto runs. Now only for registered versions, paid for versions, can you force particular programs to run. This is a useful feature. So for example, your browser, your mail client would be good to add here so that it's always run sandboxed and you don't forget to run it sandboxed. These programs will be automatically terminated if they are still executing in the sandbox after all the other programs have ended. This is the amount of space that the sandbox has in order to store downloaded files. 48 gig isn't particularly much. I always increase this to about 4 gig, so I've got a fair bit of space, but I don't always have it on immediate recovery. So I need the space in order to download the files and then make a decision on what I'm keeping. Restrictions here. You can prevent programs from accessing the internet, allow or deny programs to start and run, and you can drop the rights if you're running as administrator. You shouldn't be running as an administrator, but select that anyway, just in case that happens. Access restrictions. So for files, registry access, IPC, Windows Access COM. You can specify the sort of access that you want to allow the sandbox to have. So do you want to give any programs full access, read access, write access? Do you want to block anything in particular? Generally, you want to give as little access as possible. And then there's some specific application settings that you can make. So here we've got Firefox. This is allowing it direct access to the phishing databases. That can be okay for security. And perhaps you want to keep cookies. So you may have to, so instead of the sandbox being unable to access the cookies, you may want to add the access there. And then specific settings for various different email clients. So there you go, that's Sandboxy. If you're using Windows, there's no reason really why you shouldn't be using Sandboxy or some other sandbox alternative in order to give you that extra layer of sandbox protection. This is a good document that I recommend. It goes through using Sandboxy with your browser and an email client. So check that out, go through it if you want to set up Sandboxy with a browser or Firefox and your email client. I would also recommend the Sandboxy forums where you can find out quite a lot of information, and if you've got any particular questions, it is a good responsive forum.